Welcome to the cyberpunk future filled with new technology and scientific advancements, but once you're broke, life will always be a bitch. Everything can be bought or sold, including your own body or dignity, and the trash ends up in the slums of civilization, even if it's with a cool cyberpunk backdrop. And every emotion is experienced at the peak of the highest highs and the lowest lows. And we're speeding between these phases of rage and joy and love and pain. And you want to believe it's all for a greater meaning until you crash and burn and feel nothing. Cyberpunk is about escapism. Escape your body with life-altering surgeries, escape the responsibilities of society, and even escape your mind through cyberpsychosis. It just really shows this futility of life and this longing for even a taste of autonomy, even at the risk of loss of self and death. The cyberpunk universe already exists in this idealized hyper-capitalist future that we all hoped would be better. As usual, the highest class of people can afford everything that they need, and the things that we're trying to fight for basic human rights like healthcare and housing and education, all come with a price that you have to pay or you'll be left out. But we also see in this new technological world that there's this stain of older cybernetics that's seen in each of these characters' body modifications that's a reflection of their privilege and proximity to power or poverty. Whether these mods are a status symbol or just a method to become a more efficient tool in order to survive in this society, this echoes so many themes of Japanese cyberpunk aesthetic and postmodernism that we've seen in anime like Ghost in the Shell and Akira and Neon Genesis Evangelion and Serial Experiments Lane. And in my most recent media analysis video on the Psychopaths anime, there's so many layers of tension between the metamorphosis of human existence and working between the boundaries of individualism and collectivism, between the self and the other. But anyway, the message of Cyberpunk Edgerunners really shines through our main character, David, who gets totally fucking radicalized in the first few episodes of this anime, which is just ripe for analysis. David is orphaned when his mother can't afford medical care after this tragic highway pileup, leaving David to watch his mother die in back alley clinics and fetch her ashes from a freaking vending machine like she's a recycled canister. David already can't afford to keep up with all of this extracurricular technology in his super elite bougie-ass school, let alone afford the rent in his cubicle-sized apartment or even pay for a full cycle of laundry. So David has nothing to lose when he sacrifices his humanity by implanting this military-grade tech into his spine, in order to have a chance at fighting back in this unequal playing field than if he just had an organic body. These predetermined values of life is what David and his Edgerunner friends are fighting against in order to define for themselves. Many of these assignments send the team out to take down another high-class social parasite, and they know how to fuck them over where it really hurts, and that's where their money lies and in their databases in a world where information also has so much value. But even if we want the whole anti-capitalist vibe, cash is what allows this group to survive. They still need to gain upgrades and ammo to make their missions easier or for their next shootout. But these are also still people who have been forced to the edge of civilization their whole lives in a world where money means everything. And they're still dreaming for a better life for themselves or at least someone else's future. But all of these earthly desires come with a price. David is introduced to a whole new game when he meets this sexy city slicker pickpocket named Lucy. And Lucy really comes from an entirely different world, and she's ganged up with these underground technology mercenaries known as the Cyberpunk Edgerunners. David is literally living on the edge with his spinal tapped implant and a new group of outcast allies to get him into and hopefully out of trouble. But that's if David doesn't go into a cyber psycho murder rampage first, which is so much more likely from all of his high-risk body modifications. Plus from all of the shitty drugs that it takes to keep his body and mind from just burning out. And going into cyberpsychosis really isn't pretty or cool, as we see with David's mentor and partner, Maine. And seeing this big guy go into cyberpsychosis starts off as this mindless glitch that just disassociates them from real life for a moment, but then turns into this bloody berserker mode filled with painful flashbacks of trauma and bittersweet delusions, warped into images of a messed up and hostile reality. reality. These are the future consequences of trying to run away from his past. And similar to David, these flashbacks of Maine's past seem to still have hope, until his soul and sanity was corrupted and obliterated beyond what could even be considered a human anymore. And Maine ended up becoming this cyborg machine barely made up of bleeding flesh. Maine not only lost his life, but also his memories of the few people he valued and protected, only to put them in danger because of his own reckless disregard for his body and life. But this existential disease is passed on to those who remember him not just by how he lived, but how he died. And that's where we really see with David that nothing can kill dreams more than reality. Modern globalization has completely restructured societal norms, and we've been emphasizing materialism and normalizing lifestyles that would have been considered taboo or actually harmful, but these have now become recreational comforts in a life that's lived young, fast, and hard. And at times it's not about the substance itself being harmful, but the repetitive action and dependency. And sometimes it starts as a semi-innocent search for experimental pleasure, but then becomes compulsive cravings that are uncontrollable, debilitating, and isolating. So I looked into 2015 studies by the American Journal of Addiction to see if there's some kind of correlation to people who are addicted to these self-destructive substances. And they show these higher ratings of personality traits like depressive introversion or neuroticism. But I also recognized how a lot of these people really end up giving up on life within a matter of weeks of losing a really important relationship or a really important point of stability in their lives. This really exemplifies the rapid rate at which David reaches rock bottom after the loss of his mother and mentor. It's so strange and sad seeing David actually succeed at climbing the ranks and changing his lifestyle, from breaking through the back door of his apartment with nothing but his mother's ashes, to living in this fancy high-rise penthouse with everything in the city within his grasp. And nothing else matters as long as he has power and money and this emotional bond to Lucy. But somehow David feels even emptier from all the liveliness and rebellion and ingenuity of his youth before he entered the cyberpunk world. He went from fearing even holding a gun to killing indiscriminately. And we start to see that he has this suppressed guilt that erodes him silently, but really starts to flare up with the onset of his cyberpsychosis. With all of these promises of free will, it's hard for a kid like David to really discern who's trying to use him. Is it going to be the elite corporate schools that rejected him, or the back alley doctor that made him into his own personal cyborg pet project? Or is it the higher-ups of this technological monopoly that's corrupting society by making it entirely dependent on finite resources? I don't know how many examples we need in fictional media and in real life to recognize that absolute power of monopolies corrupt absolutely. One code could dismantle the entire internet's worth of legacy data, which all of our infrastructures and economies and lives depend on. This is the matrix that we're valued by that we're not even aware of. And this is what we're really signing up for in our future besides the destruction of our own world. The only thing that can really save us is our own dreams of wanting something better. And what really ended up destroying David from the inside out was the loss of his ability to have a dream of his own. He went from following his mother's dream to be at the top of the school they could barely afford, so that way David wouldn't have to get sucked into this kind of life even though it risked his own mother's life. Then David went on to follow the dreams of the cyberpunks and rebel against society, while playing guerrilla warfare in the city and also following the dreams of the leader, Maine. And Maine wasn't just a friend of David's mother, but also this stand-in older brother type figure that David really looked up to when he had no one else to comfort him. But sadly, that comfort also came with David inheriting Maine's body modifications. Even if it was at the cost of his own sanity, David wanted to inherit the weapons and arms that spelled out the dark fate for his very flawed role models. David took on being a leader, fighting against nefarious governments and other dark underground organizations, but really they all just end up fighting for power and money. And that would never be enough to give David's life meaning, even with practically time-stopping abilities. And all of this unregulated strength from all of these untested body modifications start a countdown for David David's cyberpsychosis to consume his mind and abilities. But like I said, this is all really happening because David could never have a dream of his own and discern from his own realities, or if he even has a soul left. There's a dark realization that erodes at this kid that we once knew as David when he has to hold the lifeless body parts of the ones whom he loved. And David just becomes numb to the inescapable dehumanization of everything he's valued. David witnesses the truth of this facade of rebellion and suicidal nihilism, and it destroys his ability to even feel or desire the same brave new world that his peers have been struggling to create. All that remains for David that's supposed to have meaning is a cold jar of his mother's ashes, and the remains of her hopes for him to escape this death loop. But David feels nothing. Not success, not rage, not lust, not even tiredness or grief. There's just the desperate tug of those who are still barely alive that keeps David tethered to the next mission until his body just can't take it anymore. And one of the most important characters that really remain as a final glimmer of hope is Rebecca, and she's one of the best characters in this series because of her own consciousness of how this fatalistic lifestyle has damaged David's psyche and body. David became more dependent on the drugs that kept him barely sane, as his psychosis fueled his rage and clipped him back and forth between these traumatic events. And these memories have followed David into his final act of sacrificing his own life for someone else's dream. But Rebecca accepted David even in his most damaged state and not for his idealized sense of self. And she supported David even while she recognized that this would destroy him and potentially the entire team in his blaze of glory. Rebecca reflected David's pain from the struggle to survive as an outcast in a big bad dystopian city as a short-stacked girl with big guns and unrequited love. At some point with every character that gets wiped out and deleted from existence in this anime, the viewer must also consciously endure the inevitable tragic end of all of their lives. And it's this sobering awareness that no one is special. You aren't built different, you aren't the chosen one. And this is where we get into revolutionary suicide. So Huey Newton was one of the iconic co-founders of the Black Panther Party of America, and yes, I'm getting into it right now, just trust the process. And he spoke of revolutionary suicide in his 1973 autobiography while he was imprisoned. Newton's concept of revolutionary suicide was structured in the context of Black disparities, of racial violence and struggle for equality. But this is also fighting against the desperation of reactionary self-destruction that just gives up on life entirely from the despair of one's social conditions. And Huey Newton goes on to say that although I risk the likelihood of death, there is at least the possibility, if not the probability, of changing intolerable conditions. And if premature death is the result, that death has a meaning reactionary suicide can never have. It is the price of self-respect. So revolutionary suicide doesn't necessarily mean that you have a death wish. In fact, it means the total opposite. It means that you have the desire to actually live with human dignity, even at the cost of death. Because existing without dignity is impossible, and we have to move against these oppressive forces. And I think this is also what drives the struggle in Cyberpunk Edgerunners, in this struggle between revolutionary self-sacrifice and reactionary self-destruction. Because sometimes it's not only just destructive, but can really serve as an effort to try and preserve against all odds, even if that change won't be seen in one's own lifetime. And in the world of cyberpunk, it's hard to envision a future past this late-stage dystopia. But the resistance can still come through in the form of sacrifice for those left behind to be freed from these endless cycles. That way they can also have a taste of individual hope. The only person in this series that found the real value for their own lives and found their own dream that wasn't based on material value or power was our girl Lucy. As trivial and childish as it seemed, Lucy just wanted to start a new life on the new frontier of the moon. And she romantically showed David this dream on the first night they met. And this digital experience actually gave them an intimate connection outside of the constraints of this oppressive life that they live in. Having a dream outside of the labels that were forced onto her for survival is the reason why Lucy survives. Lucy was able to conceptualize an exit plan by having an ideal outside of her current situation. David was never able to live long enough to see this afterlife, and I'm sure that he was aware of the consequences of his actions as soon as he became dependent dependent on his body modifications. Despite how special David believed himself to be, he still ended up sacrificing his life so that way Lucy could be freed from this meaningless existence that was actually more valuable to Lucy than the $250,000 ticket to the moon. I gotta say, Cyberpunk Edgerunners was the best adaptation by Trigger Studios, especially for such a tragic anime, and it had so many influences beyond the anime industry that was translated with this extreme and surreal grit, along with the absurdity and rebelliousness of Trigger Studios' best animated work. But this anime isn't just amazing because of its hyper-colorized action and explosively violent, bloody-ass fight scenes. And the fact that this series ends in tragedy is such an interesting statement from Trigger Studios, whose animation style and plotlines have always been optimistic even in the face of despair. Trigger Studios also has characters who live in the underground or the edge of society, and when it seems like there's no other way out, they're inspired to revolution, to break through not only their own conditions, but their own realities, even into space and alternate dimensions of existence, literally. And this is the message to find true freedom and grow into one's individual idealized self. The tragedy of Cyberpunk Edgerunners is the sour reality that sometimes we don't win, and sometimes the battle is endless. But we can still cherish moments where we can find people who understand us and fight alongside us against all opposition. Even at the threat of inevitable extermination, we have the right to fight for a world where we can live and die with dignity. But if you made it to the deep end of this cyberpunk analysis, then leave a comment down below with your thoughts on the future. And if you want more reviews, make sure you like and subscribe to join the punk family and binge through my anime essay playlist. You can follow me on my socials down in the description, and hit me up if you have any questions about my favorite anime, my YouTube gear, or for collaborations. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see y'all next time. Peace.